ideas, because books always start with ideas, and lots of people have ideas and think, I should write a book, or somebody says, you should write a book, or somebody's an expert in their field and they want to write a book for other purposes. How did you two get the idea for this book?
So I think, Mike and I have been writing together for over a decade, but really in the, academic journal space. And so over time, kind of looking at just professional goals, we had kicked around the idea of a book. And so I think there's an undertone of just our story of kind of always keeping the art of the possible front and center. The book was born out of lots of conversations, but really ended up taking shape in a very, very different fashion than I think we originally imagined. And so I think that that's something that we've learned is kind of keeping ourselves open to possibilities. And the way that this book really came to life is something that kind of threads the undertone of even the story of the beekeeper.
So Michael, did you have a certain moment in time where you guys like brainstormed, or you came to the conclusion of the beekeeper? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, great question. It's kind of a funny story. As Katie mentioned, we were kind of thinking about our next publication, and we decided to do a book. And we through her consulting work, she was doing a consulting job. I happened to be, at work in the same city, and we're like, hey, let's get together. We hadn't seen each other, and we grabbed dinner, and literally we're at a pizza restaurant, and we just started mapping out like, what could this book look like? Literally on the back of a pizza box. I actually think we actually have the image of the pizza box with all our writing on it still, and the chapters, the ideas, kind of what it would be, pardon the pun, but that's how it came together. And after we kind of had the concept and the brainstorm on the back of the pizza box, we kind of started putting a trajectory to write together, and that's really where it started.
You have this idea and you have this pizza box now, and the two of you are both experienced writers, and you've been published in academic spaces before, but not for a trade publication where you're putting yourself out there in a book format. And so how did you decide who was going to write what, and what was your process for getting the ideas from the pizza box actually into a logical manuscript?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Katie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Mike and I continue to talk about who does what. And so I think it very naturally fell into, me kind of taking what are the seminal kind of leadership learnings that we want to have this, undertone of the story guided by. Mike has a really creative side to him, and kind of came to, hey, I think that, the art of storytelling is something that we're seeing really resonate with people. And so he had this idea of writing a fable. And he said, I kind of have an idea, and he would call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. And, I'm going to go with this kind of story on a farm. And so we would be back and forth kind of brainstorming the way that it would come to life, and having these check-ins of him writing, me checking, going back to make sure that we're keeping the focus on the leadership learnings. And I'll kind of ask Mike to weigh in too on his experience through the writing process.
Yeah, since we've been publishing so long, we're kind of naturals at this. Like we both contribute to papers in a meaningful way, and it was a very similar process, right? We would start down the journey of writing. I'd make sure we're, Katie and I connected and we're on the right track, and she would weave in her thoughts and give concepts, and we would iterate and change, and I mean that's kind of the writing process. So that's really how the manuscript came to be and started. And I think for most writers, I mean, when you're writing, there's that state of flow where you just kind of like are in the zone, can't stop writing, and you just want to keep going and get all your thoughts on paper so you don't forget. And that we certainly experienced that as we were going through this process.
I love that you mentioned flow, because when you're writing and you get into that flow and ideas keep coming, and then you have this collaboration where you two have worked together before, it really can become a fun process. Did you guys experience that it was just sort of like a fun process that unfolded? The more you did, the more ideas you got. That seems to be something that we experience working with our authors as well.
100%. Yeah, and Mike, it looked like you were going to say something too, but we really just became fully immersed in the process, which is probably why we've expedited, right, this whole writing and publishing process in like a year. But it's been just all hands on deck, right? Really intensive, but exceptionally enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. And we both work full time and have jobs, so it's very difficult to do that. So a lot of your nights and weekends and time spent doing that is really important. But also, you got to be mindful of being present, and you can't just go away and write forever. So it was a balance for sure of making sure we were getting that manuscript done and thinking about what the next part of the story was with the time we could. So yeah, definitely collaborative process. But I think that's what made it so great and fast, was that we didn't have a lot of struggle agreeing, or with co-authors. I could imagine there would be difficulty, but with us, we didn't face that because we're so accustomed to working together.
Yeah. Now, in the starting pizza box to the finished manuscript, or what I would call the first draft of getting everything down, how long did that take you guys?
So we started, the pizza box was May 2022. Ironically, when we came up with the concept of the book, it was in May, and about 2 weeks after we wrote that down in the pizza box, we learned that the United Nations celebrates something called World Bee Day, which we had no clue. It hit our news feed. We were like, oh my gosh, we literally just had this idea. And so timing was really interesting. And so from May, we started thinking about, like, how are we going to get this published? We started thinking about how we're going to, query publishing agencies, how we're going to pitch it. And so that was a big part of our process too, because we didn't want to go down a journey without a clear direction of who would pick the book up or who would publish it. So we did start thinking about the pitch, and then we did start writing the first few chapters to make sure that, we kind of had an understanding of where the book was going to go and directionally as we made our pitch.
I love that.
So start to finish, May to really December was the process.
And I'll actually add to that, just for listeners, that Mike is making it sound like it was like we thought of it in May and we wrote the book by December, which I think illuminates how much he enjoyed the process, which I did too. But we had really spent the year prior just thinking about book writing, mapping out table of contents. We actually kind of vetted ideas with another publisher. And so there was kind of a learning process of us organizing our thoughts, the theories, the undertone. But then to his point, this, that aha moment when we met in Chicago and kind of mapped this out on a pizza box was like, wow, like something was born that we had never expected, but it was built on this, previous year's discussion of, what could a book look like? What would our message be? Where do we want to kind of add value in that scholar practitioner space, but really in the space that we can look around at our colleagues and say, hey, I think this would be something really useful for you.
I love that. Now, I have to ask, because there are a lot of books on leadership and team development, and you both have those experiences in your actual professional life, which is key when you're writing to actually know what you're writing about. Subtle tip for the listeners. But your idea to take the spin of a fable, I think, is really unique and has been done really well in the past. Not by many, though. So how did you come up with taking the larger concepts of leadership and putting it into the story that takes this woman through her process of developing her team?
Katie, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I had actually used a fable recently in the consulting space. And as we mentioned earlier, we were seeing a lot of resonation with this, storytelling, but in ways that almost feel obvious. It's amazing how many people get lost in habits of just the way that we always do life, right? And so there's something about the art of storytelling that allows us very simply to pause and to think about these small changes or these opportunities for us to unlearn things that we do on a daily basis that really have impactful change. And so Mike was, kind of illuminated, like, Katie, let's pause for a moment. We're seeing around us, right, the impact of storytelling. And so, he really kind of propelled us in that direction to kind of pivot to go that way.
Yeah, and as like a traveler, like for business, a lot of things that you see in the airports, and you see books on the like you get drawn to some of these fables because some of them are quick reads that you can do on a business trip and over a couple of days, and you just get immersed. So we were trying to figure out what would be the most effective way to capture leaders' attention in their busy lives. And so storytelling, and as Katie mentioned, but yet not something too robust, that could, how you start your book and then you put it away. We wanted people to feel like they couldn't put the book down because they wanted to see how it ended. And that's really where the fable came into play.
But what did you do to educate yourselves about the publishing process, and where did you start with seeking out, as you said, literary agents or publishers, or where did you go? What did you do?
Yeah, so interesting you mentioned sales, right? So I kind of took it as a sales approach a little bit. Like we had to really have a compelling story for the publisher. Katie and I worked on talking about what is that compelling story for a publisher. And if you think about the book, The Beekeeper, we really were researching how beehives operate and how the bees work together. And we felt that there was a compelling story for organizations to transfer some of those concepts into leadership. But the protagonist in the story was a female business owner. And so we knew we had something there because, I have a family, right? I have daughters. Like we all want them to experience success in life and be looked at as the ability to be a leader. And so we really leveraged that with the publishing house about our protagonist in the story of, kind of overcoming building a business and the challenges that she faced. And we found a publisher really on LinkedIn. Frankly, we were just doing our networking and connecting, and met an associate editor who liked our idea, and that's kind of how it started.
I love that you were able to utilize your network to reach out, because authors who are new, like you are, like anyone prior to having their first book, you always start with your network. Like, who do you know? How can you connect with people? Who do you need to talk to? And having the courage to reach out, I think, is something that is a skill that's built over time, which, you've built, and you've been able to reach out and put those lines in the water, and someone bit, and you were able to get in with the publisher, which is amazing. And so once you got that connection with the associate editor, what were the next steps for you? How did that roll out?
Katie, do you want to take that piece?
Yeah, I think, as I'm listening to Mike talk about the process, I'm reflecting back on, and this April is really to present day. We're still learning how to publish a book, right? So we have a publisher. The book is launching in May, but we are learning every day. And so in this process of even reaching out and making the connection, it was going to the website, looking at kind of the details of what makes successful books, deconstructing how we back in, right, to look at our network, to how we would get a book out there, to what our messaging is, to Mike's point, to make sure that the book that, the message in our book is resonating with audiences and that we're able to articulate that. And we had to do a good job of ensuring we were articulating that to the publisher. And so through the process, it was just ongoing, lots of questions, lots of reaching out to people in our network, and then, right, showing up courageously, and, with knowing that the answer could be, this doesn't work, or you have to make changes. And we were willing to do what it took to make sure that we had something that was really compelling, and that there was reciprocity, for the publisher as well.
So with the book in pre-launch status, I'd love to ask you how you feel about book marketing and what you're learning, and what are some of the things that you are aiming to try. What are your hopes, those kinds of things. So Katie, I'll toss that one to you and say, like, what are some of the things you've been learning as far as book marketing, pre-ordering?
April, I love that in your previous comment, you were encouraging me to reflect on, this process of working with the publisher and now to marketing. And I think one of the things Mike and I have leaned into is like the vulnerability of, we're subject matter experts in organizational learning and leadership, but we have to show up with beginner's mind in being first-time authors, learning how to work with a publisher, learning how to market. And so this is where the energy is spent right now. Mike said nights and weekends, we're thinking about, wow, we didn't know that we could buy lists or that we can connect with people in our network to look at, right, how we're specifically marketing. Or, we have a connection with a school who will be adopting the book, kind of school-wide and using the Hive, as a theme for an overall year-long read, right? So all of these opportunities for us to just imagine the art of the possible now that we're getting the book out there. And I think the key for us is not to be self-limiting, right? So you mentioned this in the very opening of the podcast, is it's easy to like stand in your own way and not be bold enough to ask the questions. And so we're just showing up every day, calling, right, emailing, connecting with people just in the spirit of learning. And I would say today, right, we learn more about marketing in emails that came in right before the workday starts. So this is something that is ongoing all the way up until launch, and I'm sure will be something that continues. But Mike, you probably have more to add as we think about marketing.
I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, I think that's just to be honest, it's we have to learn what we're doing, and also learning how to market a book online is a skill set. And so there's a lot of things that you just have to kind of think through and learn about, and how you can grow yourself. You also have to be vulnerable to get out there and do stuff like podcasts and be the face of your book. And it's sometimes people aren't comfortable in that space, and so you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone, which is great, and kind of underpins the book a little bit too, is enacting kind of what our the Beekeeper talks about sometimes, and vulnerability. So
how did you come up with some of these leadership lessons, and what are some that you would say you would highlight that you were able to bring into the story?
Katie, why don't you take that one?
Okay, so we should probably rewind. I don't think we mentioned that Mike and I met in our doctoral program, right? Focusing on, right, the area of expertise, organizational learning and leadership. And so all of the work that we've done over the last decade has been in the spirit of this, right? Human performance at work. And so we knew that regardless of how the book took shape, the undertone would be on this focus of human performance at work. And so when we kind of reimagined the way to take the story into a leadership fable, as Mike mentioned, the protagonist is a woman entrepreneur who is also a mother and a wife. And so the setting of the story is really her with her family, which is where this learning and discovery happens in really unsuspecting ways. And so I think there's an undertone there too that, Mike and I recognize that we're growth partners for one another in our professional space and in reaching our, academic and research and publishing goals. And so in the book, right, the protagonist, Catherine, ends up meeting someone who inspires action and learning and becomes a growth partner for her that ends up inspiring change in her organization. And so while she's on this vacation, kind of very reluctantly, right? She didn't want to go, was, kind of would rather be in another place. It was like all of a sudden when she kept her eyes, ears, heart, and mind open, she started to see these discoveries that were really driven by the lessons learned by bees. And so this is kind of, I think, how life happens. And, that if we keep ourselves open and we're able to see the possibilities, it's amazing how we can learn from the things around us. We use the learning of bees and beehives and how we can create a thriving hive in cultures at work.